I crossed the porch in the dark blue suit I only wear twice a year. I had a bottle of the wine my daughter used to like, the good kind, wrapped in tissue paper that was already damp from my hands. I was 8 minutes early, same as always, same as I'd been for every birthday and every holiday for 33 years, back before the silence started. I never got to knock. A man in green scrubs came around the side of the garage so fast he nearly ran into me. His name tag said Home Health, and his voice was down to almost nothing. "Sir, don't go up those steps. Get back in your car. Right now." I should have shaken him off. I should have laughed at him the way you laugh at a stranger who's confused you for somebody else, walked past him, and rung that bell, and finally hugged my daughter after 2 years of nothing. But there was something underneath his voice, something I recognized from a long time doing a job most people never think about, and it stopped my feet cold. I backed off that porch. I got in behind the Elkins' boxwood hedge across the street, still holding that bottle of wine like an idiot, a 64-year-old man crouched in somebody else's yard with his heart going like a jackhammer. 4 minutes. That's all it took. 4 minutes standing there before I understood that the dinner I'd been praying for since Christmas before last had never been a dinner at all. It was bait. And the hand that baited the hook belonged to my own daughter. My name is Harlan Voss. For 31 years, I sat on the other side of that exact kind of driveway. I was a field examiner for the probate and family court in Franklin County, Ohio, the guy they send out when somebody files a paper saying an old man or an old woman can't be trusted to run their own life anymore. You'd be surprised how many people don't know that job exists until they need it, or until somebody needs it done to them. I'd walk into a living room I'd never seen before, sit across from somebody's grandmother, and ask her what year it is, whether she knows who the president is, whether she can tell me who's currently allowed into her checking account, and why. Then I'd drive back downtown and write a document that decided, more or less, whether that person got to keep being a person under the law. I filed 1,206 of those reports over 3 decades. I turned more petitions down than I approved, and there were attorneys in that courthouse who'd crossed the street to avoid me because of it. And on the evening of March the 3rd, in the driveway of the house I'd paid off in 2011, a house with my own handprints in the concrete of the back patio from the year we poured it, I became the subject of the exact kind of file I used to write. Let me back up further than that, though, because you need to understand what 26 months of silence actually looked like from the inside of it. My daughter's name is Corinne. She's 37. She was an occupational therapist, I should say, was until recently, at a rehab facility off Bethel Road. She used to call me every single Sunday at 6 o'clock, not 5 after, not 10 after, 6 o'clock, since she was 19 years old and got her first apartment and decided that was going to be our thing. Then, 26 months ago, the calls just stopped. No fight that I could point to. No holiday blow-up. Just a Sunday that came and went with nothing, and then another one, and then it was 2 years, and I'd convinced myself it was something I did, some slight I couldn't name, some old wound from her childhood I'd never known I'd left. I want you to sit with that, because it is the only part of this whole story I am ashamed of. I spent 3 decades teaching families how to spot the moment somebody starts isolating an elderly relative, cutting off the phone calls, controlling who gets in the door, and when it happened to my own front porch, in my own family, I diagnosed it as my own failure as a father instead. That is how good it looks from the inside. That is how good it is designed to look. Then, on a Tuesday in late February, a text came through from a number I hadn't heard from in 26 months. "Dad, I've been a coward and I'm sorry. Please come to dinner Friday, 7 o'clock. I want to explain everything." I must have read that message 40 times sitting in my recliner with the television off. I called my late wife's sister, Dorothy, the only person left who still calls me on Sundays now, and I read it to her over the phone, and she said, "Careful," in the voice she uses when she thinks I'm about to do something a widower does, and I told her I'd been careful for 31 years and I was allowed one Friday off. I bought the wine Thursday afternoon. I picked out the suit Thursday night. I did not sleep. So there I was, Friday evening, crouched behind a hedge that wasn't mine, watching my daughter's front door like a burglar casing his own family, and what I saw over those 4 minutes is going to sound like something out of a courtroom file, because that is exactly what it became. A car I didn't recognize, a gray sedan with a rental sticker still in the back window, pulled into the driveway behind Corinne's minivan. 2 people got out, One was a woman in a blazer carrying a leather folder the size of a Bible, the kind of folder that never means anything good, not in my old line of work. The other was a man I did recognize, my son-in-law, Preston, who I had shaken hands with at my daughter's wedding 9 years ago and maybe spoken to a dozen times since, mostly about lawn equipment. The home health aide, the one who'd grabbed my arm, stood on the porch step wringing her hands like she was watching something she couldn't stop and didn't know how to. And through the front window, lit up yellow against the dark, I watched Corinne open the door for that woman with the folder like she'd been expecting her, like this was a scheduled appointment and not a birthday dinner for her father, who was crouched in the neighbor's boxwoods, holding a bottle of Cabernet. I understood it the way you understand a word in a foreign language you didn't know you spoke, all at once, whole. That folder belonged to a guardianship evaluator. I had carried folders exactly like it into exactly this kind of house for 31 years. My daughter had not invited her father to dinner. She had invited a witness. She had staged a scene where I would arrive disoriented, or so she hoped, off balance from the emotion of a 2-year reunion, primed to say something confused or contradictory in front of a woman with a clipboard, whose entire job was to write down anything that sounded like decline. And if I hadn't been warned off that porch, if that aide in the green scrubs hadn't done something that could have cost her a job she clearly needed, I would have walked into that living room and handed them every piece of ammunition they were praying for. I did not go home. I sat in my truck 2 streets over with the engine off for 11 minutes, and then I drove to the only person who owed me a favor big enough to matter on a Friday night, a retired colleague named Selma Ruiz, who'd spent 19 years doing the same job I had before she went into private practice as a fiduciary litigator. She met me at a Waffle House off Route 33, still in her church clothes, and I told her everything: the text, the aide, the folder, the rental car. And she got very quiet, the quiet she gets when she's already 3 steps ahead of me and doesn't like where the road goes. "Harlan," she said, "did you sign anything for Corinne in the last 2 years? Anything at all?" "A birthday card, a check, a form," she said was for insurance. And I sat there in that orange vinyl booth and I remembered, the way you remember a splinter you forgot was under the skin, a Sunday in the hospital after my hip surgery 18 months back, Corinne sitting at my bedside with a folder of her own, telling me it was just a form, so she could talk to my doctors if anything happened. "Just in case, Dad, just in case." And I signed it with the pen from the nurse's station because my hand was shaking from the anesthesia, and because she was my daughter, and because 2 weeks before that Sunday, she still hadn't called me in 14 months, and some fool part of me thought signing whatever she put in front of me might bring her back. Selma didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said the sentence that has not left my head since. "That's not insurance paperwork, Harlan. That's a durable power of attorney. And if it's dated the way I think it's dated, somebody's been sitting on it for a year and a half, waiting for the right Friday. I want to tell you the next 6 weeks moved slow, but that would be a lie designed to make me look calmer than I was. They moved like a freight train coming downhill with no brakes, and I was standing on the tracks the whole time doing paperwork." Selma pulled the recorded document from the county the following Monday. My signature was there, shaky, dated the day after my surgery, and beneath the part I remembered signing was a second page I had never seen in my life, granting Corinne and Preston joint authority over my accounts, my house, and, buried in a clause I'd have needed a law degree and a magnifying glass to catch, the authority to petition for full guardianship in the event of any physician's note suggesting diminished capacity. A note, Selma explained, that home health aides are sometimes pressured to write and sometimes refuse to, which was exactly why one had grabbed my arm on that porch instead of writing it. Here is where the story slows all the way down, because you need to sit in this part with me the way I had to sit in it, for real, for 6 weeks, filing petitions and sitting across desks from lawyers who used to send me Christmas cards. We found the woman with the folder first. Her name was Denise Okafor, an independent guardianship evaluator who, it turned out, had a financial arrangement with the same fiduciary services company that Preston, my son-in-law, had quietly gone to work for 14 months earlier as a client relations consultant, a title so vague. Selma laughed out loud reading it off his LinkedIn. The company was called Heritage Trust Partners, and once Selma's investigator started pulling threads, we found that Heritage Trust currently held guardianship, full or partial, over 38 elderly residents across 3 counties, every single one of them steered there through an evaluator who worked both sides of the same appointment. Preston hadn't married into my family to take my house. Not exactly. He'd married into a pipeline. My daughter, God help her, had been the access point, and I still do not know, to this hour, how much of what she did she understood the shape of, and how much she'd been slowly, patiently turned, the way you turn a person one small favor at a time, until the favors add up to a betrayal she never signed up to commit and can no longer see the edges of. The hearing was set for the 3rd week of April, and I will tell you plainly that I did not sleep the night before it, not 1 hour, because for 31 years I had sat in the gallery of rooms like that one and watched other families destroy each other over houses and checkbooks, and I had always believed, quietly, arrogantly, maybe, that it could never happen in mine. The courtroom was smaller than I remembered courtrooms being, the way childhood houses look small when you go back as an adult. Selma sat beside me at the petitioner's table, because in the end it was me who had to file. Me who had to stand up in front of a judge and ask the state of Ohio to protect me from my own daughter and her husband, a sentence I never once in 3 decades imagined saying out loud about anyone. Preston's attorney tried the angle I'd have tried myself 20 years ago in his position, painted me as a grieving widower confused by grief, unsteady on my hips since the surgery, prone to episodes Corinne would later describe on the stand in a voice so flat I almost didn't recognize her, episodes I have never had, episodes invented, I believe now, in exactly the kind of conversation Preston was trained to have with her late at night, slow and reasonable and full of love, the way you talk somebody into anything. Selma's investigator had found the recorded call. That was the hinge the whole thing swung on, same as it always is, one piece of paper or one piece of tape nobody thought would surface. Denise Okafor, the evaluator, had left a voicemail for Preston 8 months earlier that his own cell carrier's backup service had quietly archived, the two of them discussing my timeline, discussing whether the hip surgery gave us an opening, discussing. In words so plain, the courtroom went dead silent, hearing them played off a laptop speaker, how many more of Heritage Trust's 38 wards could be moved into a single consolidated fund if the paperwork on the Voss property cleared before summer. Preston did not take the stand well. His attorney tried to keep him off it entirely, but Selma had subpoenaed him, and Judge Adaiz Mensa, a woman I'd appeared in front of a dozen times back when I was the one carrying the folder, was not in a mood to let him hide behind a lawyer's objection. She asked him directly whether he recognized his own voice on that recording. He said he'd like to consult with counsel. She said he could consult with counsel about everything except whether he recognized his own voice. 15 seconds went by. I counted them the way I used to count silences in my own interviews, because silence like that always means something is about to break loose. Then he said, "Yes. Just that. And here is the part I still haven't made complete peace with, the part I suspect I never will." Corinne was called next, and when her attorney asked her to describe the hospital visit where I'd signed that form, she started to answer the rehearsed version, the version about insurance, and then she stopped mid-sentence, looked at her husband for the first time in that entire hearing, and something in her face just gave way, the way a hillside gives way after too much rain, all at once and no warning. She said, "I don't think I ever read the second page either." And she put her hand over her mouth, and she cried in front of a judge, a court reporter, her husband's attorney, and her father. And every part of me, every single part, wanted to cross that room and put my arms around her the way I did when she was 7 years old and fell off her bicycle in front of the Kroger on High Street. I did not move. I sat in that chair with my hands flat on Selma's table, and I let my daughter cry 12 feet away from me without going to her, because 31 years of this work had taught me the one lesson nobody warns you about going in. Sometimes loving someone correctly, in that specific room, on that specific day, means staying exactly where you are. The judge ruled from the bench inside of 30 minutes. She dismissed the guardianship petition entirely, voided the power of attorney in its entirety, having been procured through material misrepresentation, ordered a full accounting of every account Preston or Corinne had touched since the surgery, and then she did something I will remember longer than almost anything else that happened that spring. She took off her glasses, the way judges do right before they say the thing that isn't strictly part of the ruling, and she asked Selma, on the record, how many current wards Heritage Trust Partners was managing across the district. Selma said, 38. The judge turned to her clerk and said, "Get me the presiding judge of the probate division this afternoon." That phone call, not my case, not my house, is the only part of this entire year I believe actually changed anything larger than my own family. Heritage Trust went under state investigation within the month. Of the 38 wards, 22 cases have been reopened as of this writing. Denise Okafor surrendered her evaluator's license rather than fight the board. She was never criminally charged because, as Selma explained to me with a tiredness in her voice I'd never heard from her before, there often isn't a crime on the books for being the reason nobody ever gets to tell their own story again. Preston was indicted separately for wire fraud tied to the recorded call and 2 others like it the investigators found once they started looking. He is out on bond as I record this. Corinne was not charged. She has been in counseling since April, on her own, without Preston, and she has asked to see me twice. I have gone once. I sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she once signed my email address up for me, the way I taught her long division at that same table 30 years earlier, and neither of us said very much, and that was, somehow, enough for one Tuesday afternoon. I don't sleep the way I used to. I keep the voided power of attorney in a drawer in my desk where the original used to sit, not because I need the paper anymore, but because I need the reminder. Here is what 3 decades of writing other people's competency reports never taught me, and what 6 weeks of nearly losing my own name taught me in a hurry. They do not come for your money first. Everybody assumes it's about the money, and eventually it usually is, but the money is never the first domino. They come for your credibility, your standing, your right to be believed when you say what happened to you and who did it. Once that goes, the house is just a formality, and so is your medication schedule, and so is who gets to decide whether you're allowed visitors on a Tuesday. Money is the lock, standing is the key. And in almost every one of the 38 cases we uncovered, and in mine, the key wasn't stolen in the dark. It was handed over cheerfully, at a kitchen table or a hospital bedside, on what felt like an ordinary day, to somebody the victim loved. So here's what I'm asking you to do, and it will feel small, and it will feel almost insulting in how simple it is, and I want you to do it today anyway. Go find your power of attorney. If you can't find it in 20 minutes, that tells you something. If you signed one during a hospital stay, a divorce, a bad year you'd rather not revisit, and you have not looked at it since, call an attorney this week and have it reviewed, and revoke it if it needs revoking. It costs less than a used refrigerator. Then write down, on an actual piece of paper, every single person who currently has access to your bank accounts, your email, your medical records, and ask yourself, honestly, when you last had a real conversation with each one of them. Because the question was never who's going to steal from me. The question is who is already holding a key to your life that you handed them yourself and never once thought to take back. Before I go, I need to hear from you, because this splits every room I've ever told it in, every single time. Tell me, sons and daughters listening, if you were in that courtroom watching your father cry 12 feet away, would you have stayed in your chair the way I did, or would you have crossed that room? And you, mothers and fathers listening tonight, tell me if you've ever signed something at somebody's bedside because you loved them and it felt unkind to read the fine print in front of them. I have thought about that hospital signature every day for 6 months, and I still don't know if the mistake was mine or if the mistake was ever letting love and legal paperwork share the same room in the first place. Tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are, because it does something to me, still. Knowing this is playing on a porch in Tulsa at 9 at night, and in a car outside a pharmacy in Scranton, and on somebody's phone in a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning where nobody else is awake to talk to. If you've ever been the subject of a conversation happening about you, in a room, while you sat right there, and nobody thought to ask what you thought, tell us. Somebody scrolling past your comment at 2 in the morning has never once heard another person say it out loud before you did. Go find that folder in your drawer tonight. And go be a little more patient tomorrow with somebody you love, even the ones who've disappointed you, because none of us know yet which Friday dinner is the one that matters.